Hello and welcome to the Walter Scott Prize Shortlist Spotlight. I'm Sheila Averbach, the social media manager for the prize, and I'm delighted to see lots of you logging on live to watch this. If you are joining us live this evening, please let us know in the comments where are you watching us from, and let us know if you have any questions for this week's guest. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Amanda Smyth. She is the author of this wonderful book, Fortune. It's just been shortlisted for the prize. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You are the author of 3 books, the first of which was also historical fiction, but this is the first time that you have been shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
I was surprised and overjoyed. It was just such a good feeling. Because although it's a historical story, I didn't write it with that intention. I didn't imagine that I was writing a historical novel. It was just a story that I wanted to tell. So yeah, I was absolutely thrilled.
So where did the idea for writing about oil rush Trinidad in the 1920s, where could that possibly have come from?
Well, my family live in Trinidad, so my mum is there, that side of the family, and I've been going back for years and spending time there, and it's a great storytelling culture. And I knew for this next idea that I wanted to write about an explosion. That's all I had in my head, was that I wanted to write about an event that affects a lot of people. And, originally I was looking at the London bombings in 2005. So that was in my head. And I started researching that, thinking about the people who were taking those trains that day. I could have been one of those because I lived in London at the time. So it was very much in my head, thinking about the kind of synchronicity that happens, certain people getting tubes or buses, trains, they then ended up being in that situation where they were involved in this terrible tragedy. So I began researching it. And then I spoke to my mum about it, and she said, why didn't you think about writing about the dome, which was, also a horrible, massive, the worst oil disaster in Trinidad oil history, that happened in 1928. And we had some family links to that story, and there were people that we knew who could tell us firsthand about how that affected them. So I started just looking into it. And I came across a document that was written by a priest in Trinidad who's a very good writer, Father de Vertai. And he'd written this 3-page document, this account of the Dome fire and the events that led up to it. And it was so beautifully written, so economically written. I remember clearly reading this thing and thinking, oh my God, this is the explosion I want to write about.
So how did you hit upon this? How did you decide to dramatize it in a way that is so gripping? Because this is a beautifully told story, full of tension. The Dome fire obviously is a tragedy, but how did you turn it into a story that's such a page turner?
I started writing, once I started reading around it and started talking to people, I then started reading newspaper accounts. And my original idea was to write from different points of view of people who'd been there. So in the same way that I was looking at the London bombings, I was thinking about all those individuals who made those small decisions that took them to the place that day. And I started then looking at the 17 people who died. So I decided to write about 17. I thought I'd write 17 points of view. So I began just opening files on my computer and giving them names, the real names. And then I started using what I knew about those people to describe how their days may have led to that point. So it got very complicated. And eventually I realized that actually there were maybe 3 or 4 stories that really I could hone in on. And within those stories, those small lives, in a way, I could use them to tell this bigger story.
It seems that you chose brilliantly well, because we have the oil prospector who has experience of drilling for oil, and he's hit oil, but he's never hit the money before. Then he can't do it without a financier. You have the financier, and then you have the woman that they are both in love with, who is the financier's wife. And it's just a gift, isn't it, in terms of telling a story, because it's huge high stakes, it's huge high risk, and huge huge profit if you get it. But there, you sense really early on there can't really be a happy ending for these people, because this affair is going to come out. It has to come out.
Mm. Yeah, and I think when I began writing, I use visuals quite a lot. So I create a mood board above my desk, which randomly I put pictures in that create a kind of sense of the time or the thing. I had a whole collection of images in there, and one of those images was a photograph of my great grandfather, in fact, at an oil well, and I started to describe him and the woman who's with him, and she became Ada and he became Tito, and I literally just described what I was seeing in the photograph and kind of embellishing that, and that became the first piece of writing. So those characters, I knew Eddie because I based him on the real life character, who is Bobby Wade. And Bobby, as I understood him, was a very a man full of chutzpah. He was passionate, brave, saw himself as a pioneer. And, when I thought about the kind of qualities this kind of spirit that it would take to make those things happen, very determined and, an impressive man, who just thought luck was on his side. So he came quite easily. And then these other two characters came really from the photographs that I used. And then I started sort of building on those and imagining their inner lives a little more.
And the book reads like we are talking talking about characters who are real insiders of the oil industry. But how do you strike that balance between all of the research you must have had to do into oil prospecting and still telling a good story? Because I think the balance is just right. Did you have to hold yourself back from revealing everything you've learned about drill bits?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for saying that. No, it's true. I mean, that was the challenge, because I would talk to oil men and talk about their experience of, particularly, I suppose, drilling much later, the 70s and 80s. But I found this book called it was called the Tales from the Derrick Floor, which really made me very excited, which is basically a kind of oral history of the Texas oil pioneers. And this is, I have it here next to me. This is the book, which is kind of dogged and with lots of little markers. But because it's an oral history, what I was getting was the kind of the blood and guts, the vivid eyewitnesses, the hazards of oil drilling in those days, and the gushers, what that was like. And then these kind of colorful, rugged characters, that were drawn to these places like Corsicana and Beaumont, Texas, where it was a very exciting time. So they have first-hand accounts of what it was like to see Spindletop, and the kind of the sound that was coming out of the earth, and they describe it in a way, because it's an oral account that's then recorded. They're speaking in their own kind of register. It's a very conversational tone. So when I read that, I thought, this is Eddie. This is so much of this is Eddie's life. And I gave that to him, and I ran with it. It felt suddenly those terms, the blowout preventer, the diamond bit, the drill bit, the crown block, the Kelly, those words that as I was finding them, I was thinking, whoa, these are just such lovely words. Even the word Corsicana, where this was happening, which I loved. I remembered during the process of writing, I was going through a particularly kind of frustrating patch of trying to decide, which voices to lose, which to keep, and wondering, what am I writing about oil for? And a friend of mine who lives in Australia had sent me a gift to keep me going, kind of as a Christmas gift, and it arrived in the post. And I opened this package, and it was a tin. And without her knowing what I was particularly working on, the tin was a cake. Inside the tin was this black cake. And on the front of the tin, it said, "A cake from Corsicana."
Wow.
And Texas. And I thought, oh my goodness, you get these little signs as you're working, so this immersing myself in that world of Beaumont and using that language. And then I had this thing on my which was above my desk. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yes, a diagram.
Yeah, which and I'd watch sort of endless videos about 1930s, how they would get the oil out of the ground, and then I just thought, I'm going to forget it. I just must forget it. I'd write down key sentences and then I just forget it. And I didn't want it to become a kind of manual for, this is how to look for oil in your backyard, with this equipment. So, but I was charmed by the terms. And I think that, I use them, I dropped them in where I felt they would work in a sentence, basically.
They are beautiful words, and writers love words. So it's just like these little gifts that you can put into the story. And you do feel as the reader that it was surprising when I looked back at it, and nothing is said in Texas, because we have a real sense of what Eddie went through when he was there. And there's this great line where Ada is getting to know Eddie, and she says, did you like Texas? And he said, nobody likes Texas. It's full of crooks. So Eddie did not have a good time in Texas. And it's frustrating because drilling for oil is still as much of an art as a science. And even today, they don't know where exactly to drill. So the risk is there. And it hadn't occurred to me either that when it comes out, it's really coming out at force, and it can kill you, and it can blow your clothes off, and it can cut your head off. And, this is not a low stakes operation.
Yeah, it's high stakes. I mean, it is hazardous. A lot of, I was flicking through this book again today, and, talking, there's one particular section that's written from the point of view of an undertaker. And he talked about the bodies, that fell off, even just fell off the derrick, and that they were blasted off, and then they died. They hit the head and they died. And so there was some of it's quite grim reading, actually, although there was a great deal of excitement, and I imagine that there were only 9,000 people who were living in the town of Beaumont. And when they started to find oil, within days, 50,000 people were arriving, and they were arriving on trains and wagons. They were clinging onto the tops of, all kinds of precarious looking, vehicles just to get there, to try and find their luck. And a lot of those people I think they were quite, some of them were total chancers, they were criminals, they were on the run. So it was a very lively place. And I think there was a lot of death.
The book is I thought anyway, so beautifully written. I wonder if you would give us a quick reading.
Yes.
Okay. I will let you have the stage. Please do also let us know in the comments if you have any questions for Amanda. We will be asking her your questions later on, but just for now, I will let Amanda have the stage.
Okay. So I'm going to read from the moment when Eddie, when they first strike oil. So this is after many weeks of drilling and preparing the land. This is the moment when it happens for them. Just as Eddie said, and how Flora saw it in her dream, oil soon arrived. 3 weeks of drilling, and Eddie heard Callahan shouting and saw the rush of men to the derrick floor and figured something must be wrong. A deep groan from below the ground, and as he ran along the ridge and up the steps to the platform, the earth started to shake. Next came a fizzy, hissing sound, and Eddie was up there at the mouth of the hole in time to feel the loud pop, like a ball from a cannon, and see a burst of black liquid shoot some 100 feet high beyond the crown and into the blue sky. His men ran for cover, fleeing up the bank to the safety of the steam room. Then they started yelping, ran down the bank again, and they jumped in the air, throwing off their hats, letting the fountain fall back on their upturned faces and splatter like black rain, a dispensation from God, on their skin, in their hair, over their clothes. Eddie took off his hat too and let the oil pour down on him. He rubbed it in his face, into his scalp. He felt it splatter on his chest. Long, Tripe, Horatio, all his men were staring up at the column of oil. And on the bank, Grace held on to Mercy. Mercy's hands were up in her face. She was yelping, "Look, it come, it come." Eddie shouted, "Call Chatterjee, call him." Horatio started for the house, but Chatterjee was suddenly there. Eddie took his arm and raised it above his head. "Sonny, what did I tell you? What did we tell you?" Then he yelled into the air, "Hallelujah, hallelujah." Fetch your wife, Eddie said to Chatterjee. She should see this. It doesn't happen every day. You hear what I'm saying? But she was already on her way, running down the hill with their boys. Come, get up here. Eddie looked around at the black dripping men, the tower of oil, the derrick floor awash with it. He wanted to hold it in his mind like a photograph. Along the fence, he saw McLeod's men standing and watching. When a well came in, it was good manners to cheer or clap, even if the well belonged to somebody else. McLeod was there too. Eddie could see the outline of his hat. Meanwhile, the oil gushed. From above, Callahan shouted down to him to close off the well. They'd run the drill pipe in too far. We hit a spark, and the whole thing goes.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. In the story, of course, they hit oil, they hit money. It goes well a couple times. You mentioned Sonny Chatterjee. Tell us a little bit about who he is. He's outside this love triangle.
Yeah, so Sonny is the landowner. And I think, in those days, there were, the Sonny would have had a piece of land that had, he was given, indentured workers came, they were offered land, some money. He would have been one of those Indian men who was given a piece of land to farm. So his land was full of cocoa trees, which were then dying because there was a disease at the time called witchbroom disease. So the timing of this, in real life was interesting because Sonny was feeling pretty wretched that the cocoa trees were dying. And he knew that there was something going on with this stuff coming out of the earth, and he didn't really understand it. People around him were circling. So there was Apex, Texaco. They would have been seeing that Sonny was, his land was soft, kind of soggy with oil in places. So they said that, there was oil. You could push an umbrella in the earth and the oil would bubble up and it would trickle like honey down the path. So it was known that he had this oil on his land. So, but Sonny was really reluctant because possibly, what was happening at that time, you get a big corporation coming in, they'd lease the land and then they'd use it. They'd take away the trees and they'd try and get whatever they thought might be on there, and then they'd leave it in a mess. So Sonny was very wary of inviting anybody in. So when it came to Bobby Wade convinced him that he should work with him. He had that kind of charm, which is what I then gave to Eddie. So Chatterjee, he's reluctant. He's a bit of a depressive. He's suspicious. He wants his piece of the cake. But what happens with Sonny as time goes on is he becomes also quite excited. He wants to believe that all this is going to happen for him, that when he starts to make some money, he too buys a car and he feels excited and he feels that he can give his wife, who's suspicious, he can give her what he feels she wants. So he begins to enjoy that.
One reason I think the story works so well, just as a narrative, is that all these main characters they're all in their last chance, aren't they? You feel like, Sonny is right at the end. He can't use this cocoa plantation anymore. Bobby is probably on his, Eddie is probably on his last chance. Tito, little does his wife know, he's just been ruined in the stock market crash. He has virtually no money left. Everybody is at their very last chance, which gives it just a wonderful, again, higher and higher stakes.
Yeah, and I think there is a sense that independently they'll all do okay, actually. If Eddie just went back to America, Ada could settle with her husband. There is a way that they could actually change and make their lives work. But I think what I do to them is I make them want and want and want more. So they're driven by this need to overreach. So they're looking for something. They're dissatisfied. They want more and more, and that's their demise, really. That's what takes them down.
So thinking about the setting of Trinidad itself, it almost comes across like a character in the story. It's so vivid, the lushness, the rain, the ocean, the mosquitoes, the floods, all of it. Did you write this when you were in Trinidad, or just from what you remember?
No, I wrote this when I came back, so I go often, but I also I remember at the time I was reading a book by Charles Kingsley, who wrote in first person present tense an account of these early days of discovery in Trinidad. So before anything was really developed, and he wrote this very intense account of the of the forests, of the green clouds that formed above the forest, of the quenks, of the monkeys, of the butterflies, and I was completely enchanted with this kind of untouched, untamed Trinidad, some of which I've experienced, some of which I knew of. And I think, I love Trinidad. It's part of my bones and my heart, so I think, it was very pleasant for me to spend a long time in those places. And that book was quite pivotal in how I chose to describe it.
I know that you're aware that we have a young Walter Scott Prize for writers aged 11 to 19 who are writing historical fiction, some of them for the first time. You obviously teach creative writing as well. As a piece of advice that you could give to young readers, to young writers, what would it be?
I think the most important thing for me is to completely, when I found that the story of the dome, was to completely immerse myself in the world of that time. And by doing that, by reading around it, by researching in newspaper accounts, libraries, looking at documentation, I really did spend time hunting down the feel of that time, the music they would have listened to. And I threw myself into that era. And I think when you do that, you discover stories within stories that you may think you're writing about this, but you end up writing about something else. The process of researching that, of creating a vision board, completely diving into that world. And you'll find all kinds of things if you keep your curiosity and talk to people. Just throw yourself into it 100%.
What is a vision board for people who've never done that, for writers who haven't done that?
My vision board, this is how I do it, whether, other people do it in this way. I get a very basic glass frame from IKEA, which is, maybe poster size. And anything that I find that might be intuitively, that I might think, oh, that kind of feels like that era, I will take it and put it in the vision board. And it could be the photograph of the sea on a particular day. I think that just reminds me of, Eddie down the islands with Ada. That's what the water looks like. Or, I put photographs of cars in my vision board. I put pictures like, so I would have, this was in my vision board, which is, a photo of the explosion. There was a few of those, which just to, remind me of what I was writing about. And then this one was a kind of odd one, which is just people talking, but I sort of imagined that could be, and for a scene, it can trigger a thought of a scene. And some of the things might not look like they fit at all, but I've realized I've done this with every book. I hadn't thought that I was doing that, but I've realized that that's what I've done. So the frame at the moment is empty and it's waiting new pictures, so I'm thinking about what's going to go in there next.
Something that I thought was really effective in the book is this isn't just an oil prospector who's in love with the wife of the financier. He and Tito, Eddie and Tito, they really like each other, and that friendship between the two men really, it makes the infidelity almost unbearable to watch. I think it was so effective. And also you see the friendship between the men and the affair and the oil and the money. It seems that everything is coming to a peak right at the same time, and we have the sense that it can't be controlled, because as you said, they're all reaching a little too far. They just push it too far.
Yeah, and I think what I wanted to do with Ada and with Eddie was, On the one hand, this is such a massive betrayal of Eddie, to his and the friendship, that his friendship with Tito is so important to him, and he's dependent on him for the finances to make this thing happen. So he can't pull out. He can't let Tito find out. But I also tried to write it in a way that I didn't want to have huge judgment about what him and Ada were up to, because yes, it hurt Tito and it was wrong, but there was also, I hoped that by developing, their characters well enough that actually, the kind of the Rumi quote of, out there beyond right doing and wrong doing, there is a field and I will meet you there. I wanted their affair to be also, they all loved each other. He loved Tito, he loved Ada loved Eddie, she loved her Tito. She didn't stop loving Tito, she lost them both. And I kind of wanted to do that without too much judgment, that the heart is it's a big and unpredictable thing, just like the oil. It's we don't know what it's going to do. So I hope that kind of comes across. But the betrayal was, it's not good.
I wondered if you can tell us anything about what you're writing now, or is it a total secret?
I am circling a couple of ideas, and I'm in that sort of phase of, I call it nest gathering, where I've had two ideas that I think I like, and I just start collecting things for the frame, images. I'm making notes, and I'm not sure which one I'm going to go with at the moment, but I'm starting to collect them and work on them. One of them is I'm quite excited about, which is about the Darien Gap, which is a pretty scary place. So I'm looking at and writing about a journey through the Darien Gap, but we'll see.
And I think that we may also see you next month. Is that right, at the Borders Book Festival?
Yes.
I'm so delighted that you're going to come. If you are watching this live, please be aware that you have a chance to meet Amanda Smyth and other authors from the Walter Scott Prize Shortlist live at the Borders Book Festival. There's going to be a wonderful shortlist panel event on the Saturday night. We will put information on screen and also in the notes. Here is a link to where you can go to get tickets for the shortlist panel event. There is also going to be the Walter Scott Prize live prize giving at the Borders Book Festival. Of course, £25,000, one of the largest literary prizes, and certainly the largest one for historical fiction. If you would like to know more about Amanda's writing, you can always follow her on Instagram, Amanda Smyth Stories. Is that right?
That's right. Thank you.
And do you have anything else that you can tell us about, or even show us? Do you have any more photos that you can show us from your research? I would love to see more of them.
Well, let me have a look here. I think some of them are in the back of the book. This is a picture of my great aunt. Let me see if I can get that there. So wow. What I love about this picture is she's so elegant. Then look at all those pipes and strange equipment around her. She was obviously visiting it for the day. And then this one I love, which shows you the kind of the scale of can you see the tiny man? Can you see him just there? He's really
dwarfed by this huge thing.
Huge derrick. Yeah. So yeah, there are some in the back of the book. I remember when I went to the site, I went to the site where the dome fire took place, and it's all fully grown over with elephant grass now, and you would never know that this thing happened there. So I'm kind of glad, to have brought some awareness, of that story back again. I think it's a kind of important one for people to know about, especially in Trinidad.
So if any of you watching haven't read this yet, please read Fortune. It is an absolutely an explosive tale for sure. You did what you set out to do. You definitely wrote about an explosion and a lot more. Thank you so much, Amanda, for chatting with us tonight. If you are watching this and you would like to know about upcoming Walter Scott Prize events, please follow the hashtag Walter Scott Prize on social media, or just go to our YouTube channel and click subscribe, and you'll be the first one to hear about what we're doing next. And what we're doing next is talking to James Robertson. He's the author of News of the Dead. On the 2nd of June is going to be his live interview. This book covers more than 1,000 years in a Scottish glen, an incredible feat. Really good read. Please do pick this up as well. Again, thank you, Amanda, for giving us all your time this evening and for answering our questions.
Thank you.
And looking forward to seeing you at the Borders Book Festival.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Bye.